All right. I want to welcome everyone. This is my first broadcast or posting on my new YouTube channel. I'm Ted Pugh. I pastor Connect Church in Ventura, California. And the devotions and the podcast on this channel will deal with faith, and it'll focus on inspiration. It'll focus on our faith journey, as well as doing life in real time. So that's kind of where we're going to be coming at on this channel. So today we're going to begin a conversation about racism in general, and with a larger focus on churches and Christ followers and white churches and white Christ followers. How are we dealing? How are we understanding this topic, this large issue in our community? I've invited my friend and fellow pastor Jamal Alexander to join us today. And Jamal, I want to welcome you, and thank you for being with us and doing this with me.
My privilege.
Thank you. We both know that our world and our nation, they're experiencing an unprecedented times. We're experiencing right now a world pandemic and cries of protest over the brutal murder of George Floyd that have spread into many countries, and that crying out against racism and calling for a change. And so I've invited Jamal here because I know some of his journey, and I know his heart for people in general. I also know that he has a heart for the oppressed. And in our conversation, I hope and I pray that we can come away with better questions, a greater understanding of the situation, of the circumstances, of just the context of what we're in today, and been in for a long time. I hope we come away to be able to ask better questions, greater understanding. I hope we come away with a desire to listen and the importance of reconciliation, healing, and change. So that's my desires today, that at least start a journey for ourselves and others today. So Jamal, can you just share a little of your story, of your experience of pastoring in the inner city and growing up there?
Yes, I sure will. And thank you for having me today, Pastor. I appreciate that. And welcome to your congregation and your viewers. I grew up in what we called, in the day that I grew up there in the 50s and 60s, 1950s, 1960s, we just called it the east side of Los Angeles. In most recent years, they've called it South Central Los Angeles and then ultimately South Los Angeles. When I grew up in the community, it was predominantly, overwhelmingly, maybe 97, 98% Black. And it was across the boards of Black. We had Black professors, we had Black educators, we had Black business people, we had Black janitors, we had everything that was within the Black population lived in the same community that I did. So we had role models that were diverse in the community. The pharmacy was a Black pharmacist, and the dentist was a Black dentist, and so forth. And that was South Los Angeles, or east side of Los Angeles when I grew up, and I changed dramatically into the late 70s and 1980s. But I grew up in not a religious home. My parents had divorced and separated earlier in my life, but I remained in full contact with both mother and father, and primary caretaker was my mother. My mother was not what you would call an active Christian, but she believed in Christ. And she made sure that her children attended church on a regular basis. So we were always in the Baptist church. My father was not a practicing believer. I don't even think he was ever a believer, period. But his sister, my aunt, was, and she was from the African Methodist Episcopal tradition. So while we would stay with him, we would go to the AME church. So we were influenced by both. It wasn't until I was into my teenage years in the early 1960s that my identity became critically important to me, and I did not see any relevance within the church community, the Christian church community. And that was during the time when we saw the development of some of the Black Power movements. At that time, that's when we were hearing a lot of the voices of Malcolm X alongside Martin Luther King and others. And so I saw my only option going into the revolutionary track. And so I walked away from Christianity and engaged Islam for a while, engaged the Panthers, engaged other revolutionary type organizations. And then it was probably 23 years later that I struggled again with a religious awareness and then came back to Christ. And that was when I came back to Christ, is when God then called me to become a pastor and to plant churches. And he told me he wanted me to plant churches in the inner city. But I would tell people the place I knew I was not going back to was Los Angeles. And that's exactly where God sent me back to in 1990.
He does do that.
Founded the church in 1991 on the same street that I went to elementary school and used to run up and down to go to the local park to swim. And it's been a challenge pastoring the church because we have to navigate both worlds. We have to navigate this religious world, and we have to navigate the actual real experience world that the people are living in the conditions that they're living in. And so that's just kept me challenged, but it's been a rewarding. We've had great success. And of course, along with any endeavor, you have some failures and you have successes. And so we accept those as just life and reality.
Right. Wow, that's quite a journey. And God does take us to places where we said we'd never go, doesn't he? That seems to be it. What was your thoughts and your feelings when you saw the video, like all of us have seen, of George Floyd's death, and also thoughts and feelings about the protest that have followed, both good and some of the riots? Because I know you've been in the midst of some of that in LA in your past, but what are your thoughts, and what do you think when all that began to happen?
Let me preface, Pastor, by saying I was a older teenager when the 1965 watch riot occurred. So I had that experience, and we had the experience of the whole city. Well, not the whole city, but the South Los Angeles area being taken over by the military. On my street, on top of the church that some of my relatives assisted in building, is where there was a 50 caliber machine gun being posted by the National Guard. And on my street that I grew up on is where a man who did not stop at a checkpoint was shot by that 50 caliber machine gun. And then to follow that up into 1992 with the riots of Rodney King, and all of life experience in between all of those times. When I saw the video, and I'd heard of the story prior to seeing the video, and when I heard of the story, I said, oh, there goes another one, because you hear so many and you're aware of so many. But when I saw the video, again, it reminded me of the King video where you could watch him being beat. Now you can watch this man, in this case, physically die. And my initial response was one of, here we go again, one of anger, one of frustration. And then one was my concern of how the people were going to react and respond. And as in the case of 1965, followed of the case of 1992 in Los Angeles, every time they began to burn, they burned down our own community. And Pastor, this is unbelievable, but it's factual. There are lots in Los Angeles and South Los Angeles that were burned down. The buildings that were there were burned down in 1965, never to be erected again, stayed vacant. And in 1992, the buildings that had not been destroyed, but were next door to those empty lots, then became destroyed and never have been rebuilt since.
Wow.
So that was my thoughts. My thoughts were going through those kind of things. One thing I will say is that I was very pleased that the mayor of Los Angeles decided, when he asked for assistance to help calm the looting and calm the violence, that he said, you can go to every area of Los Angeles, but don't go to the South area. Leave South Los Angeles alone. They're not looting there. And we do not want to have a repeat of 65 and 92, where they're overwhelmed and overtaken by the military.
Wow, that's incredible. That was a wise decision that they made there. As we think about this, I was reading just recently from Barna and some of his research on racism and how the church and how Christ followers have dealt with it, or their impressions of it. So I'm just going to read a couple things that he says about, and then ask you to make some comments. He says, in a recent study, and I'm going to read this, 50% of practicing Christians believe that the United States history of slavery continues to impact Black Americans today. So 50% of practicing Christians. He breaks it down now. While 79% of Black practicing Christians believe it continues to impact Black Americans today, compared to only 48% of practicing white Christians believe it continues to impact Black Americans today. And it goes on to say, and when broken down to just practicing millennial Christians, it's kind of surprised with this stat, is that 2/3 of the millennial Christians today, practicing millennial Christians, are that they say it's ongoing. There's ongoing repercussions from the era of slavery. And so interesting things to look at when you begin to break that down. It goes on to cite, when practicing Christians were asked the question, do you believe minorities have experienced undeserved hardship? He said, the survey says 18% said always, 25% said usually, but 47% said sometimes, and 6% said rarely and never. So when we look at some of this, and the stats, the certificates, I remember sitting, and you were probably in that same luncheon that we had for the Southern California Network last year, and when Miles McPherson shared. And I remember him sharing the story of that when he was growing up, that every child, Black child, as they grew up, sons especially, they would get the talk about, here's how you respond to when you're pulled over by the police, and here's how you do these things. So when we think about the ongoing part, where Barna begins to break that down of how many practicing Christians and churches believe the different levels of how it's still affecting today and how it's still going on today. What are your thoughts? What are your observations and thoughts, and maybe your experience on the church and how we are grappling with it as Christians, especially, again, I'm going to speak of myself as a white pastor, and I pastored in the four churches that I pastored, in the four areas I pastored. 3 of them were in highly diverse communities, where in one of them the predominant was Latin American, and others in that. So the community I pastor in now in Ventura is predominantly white. I grew up white, obviously. Mom taught us to love everybody, but my experience is not the same as yours. And that makes it sometimes hard, I think, for us to understand. I try to understand it through scriptures and understand the love of God. We love everybody and everybody's equal in that sense. But in practicality, I just, some thoughts of yours, some ways that how you would understand this, and how you may better help us as in churches and pastors and Christians to grapple with this, because I see so many on Facebook that they're just yelling at each other, and they're just, screaming at this is and that, and that's not a conversation. It's not a dialogue. It's not productive. So I just threw out a lot of stuff. You just take it where you want to take it, Jamal.
Well, thank you. With Barna and his study, and it's his studies are kind of matched with the studies from the Pew Research group, and they've both come up with pretty much the same kind of stats when they've asked those questions and done the research among the various groups, especially when we talk about white and Black. Mm-hmm. And I may say that we need to always make that distinction between the white and Black interaction in America and the interaction of any other group other than the Native American. Mm-hmm. The white and Black interaction in America, as you saw the millennials mentioned it in the Barna report, mm-hmm. has found its roots because of the history and the reality of slavery. Mm-hmm. And that's a fact. And so where other minority groups or ethnic racial groups can come in, they don't have that history.
Mm.
I have in my possession, I just didn't bring it out today for this meeting. I have my great great grandfather's freedman papers.
Wow.
You know, and so I mean, what other group in America can hold a document in their hands and say, this is the freedom document? And this was years after the emancipation that they really got the freedom of documents, because they were obligated to pay off some funding, that you have the one of your ancestors. And so, but again, the real lived experiences of people really form their perspective on life and how the lens that they look at life through. Even though we use Christianity as our religious expression, how we interact and how we see is based upon the lens upon which we see life through. And so for 79% of Black Christians to believe that they're still impacted today racially is not a surprising statistic. I would have thought it would have been even higher than that. And for 48%, if I'm correct, of white Christians saying that there's an act, but that means that 52% don't think that anything is happening at all.
Right.
And you referenced Facebook, and if we looked at some of the craziness going on there, you'd realize that, oh yeah, a lot of people don't even think it is occurring at all. But having that said, I think the real challenge is to be able to recognize that you may not have had a hand in any of the historical things that occurred negatively against the Black population in America as a white individual. But you can acknowledge that, but don't deny that they are still experiencing what they are experiencing.
Right.
I mean, I still experience what I experience, Pastor. And just because I'm a Christian, well, let me say this, that doesn't stop what I look like, my religious position, and no one knows it. And I don't call it, but psychologists use the term of cognitive dissonance. And that's where it becomes so difficult for you to accept this information that it sends your brain into a turmoil. I'm saying that, they wouldn't say it like that, but that's the way I see it. That you can't understand it. I had a Black minister in the Assemblies of God who was raised in a predominantly Anglo community, attended an Anglo church to where they were, if not the only, maybe one of the only couple of Black peoples attending his whole life, all the way through primary school, all the way up until he left to go to college. And then in the initial college that he went to, he was a small group, but never had real interactions with other Blacks. So his life experience had been completely different. When he faced racism here in California, it took him into a cognitive dissonant moment that he told me directly. He said, if I have to accept that that's true, then that means that I would have to change my whole worldview. My whole life would turn upside down, and I would have to leave this organization.
Wow.
And so if that happens to someone who is feeling the brunt of the racism, you can see how challenging it is for someone who would say, I had nothing to do with slavery. I've never been a racist. I've never overtly done anything discriminatory towards anyone. But why do they feel this way? So you can understand the difficulty and the challenge with that.
Very good. This is a large question and it's off the cuff. What advice or direction you would give for, again, I'm going to say white pastors, predominantly white congregations, those that obviously have not lived your journey, ones who don't believe in racism in the sense that they're not racist, but still, we can easily think we understand, but we don't. Is there any helps and suggestions you might make how to help us better engage with others who are of the Black community, and try to have better understandings, better relationships, where, we just think everything's kind of okay until something starts burning,
Correct.
or something blows up or really bad. What would you give us for that?
Well, I would say to begin, we need to, those outside of the Black community need to get to a place to where they will accept the real lived experience of the Black community as they're saying it,
Right.
and not take it as a personal assault upon them,
Mhm.
but take it as a declaration of a group of people or a person who was sharing with you their real life experiences. Can I just give you an example, Pastor?
Absolutely, yes.
And I think anyone viewing or even hearing has heard this over the last few days, that I'm tired of saying this, I'm tired of having to feel this way, I'm tired of having to explain this. But here's one, and that is I and everyone, I'm well known within our organization, but I can go to a conference and I can forget to put my lanyard on and don't have my badge clear. And I can step into an elevator and I can see the fear on the eyes of the Anglos that are there. I am an immediate threat. Now, I'm so conscious of it that I know I need to pull mine out, put it around my neck. And then I see a release like, okay, he's a safe one. So when I tell people these stories and others tell us these stories, we have to accept those as being the real lived experience of the person that's telling you that story. That would be the beginning to have a dialogue that helps us to understand, and then working together to try to figure out how can we change it. But if you don't even accept that my real life experience is true, I'll leave this one alone, because I did have someone the other day call me and tell me that they couldn't believe what a minister had just told them, and this was all fabricated.
Oh my.
Yes. And they said, I had to call you. This is a white friend of mine who called me to tell me what another white friend pastor of his told him. And he said he believed it, and that's what he was saying. And I'm like, okay, this is not reality.
Right.
But the experience that I just shared with you is reality. It may seem foreign to you and to others, but it is a real experience that Blacks feel. We saw it overseas when Oprah walked into a store and the people weren't aware who she was. Oprah Winfrey, a multi-billionaire, and they acted as though she was a potential thief, just because, again. And so I would submit that the first step has to be accept the realities of how Blacks are really experiencing life here in America.
That's really good, Jamal, because as you said, it seems like immediately we get defensive.
Yes.
We as the white culture or whatever, that when approached, or when even saying your story, your experience, that it makes a defensiveness come up, saying, oh, that can't be like that because I've never experienced that, or I've never seen that, and that. So that is a jewel of an answer in that sense, because that is a great way that helps, that in my conversations with others, to say, we need to just listen and accept this is a real experience, and that we can't deny that. So that's good. I really like that. That's a great help in that sense. As you mentioned so many things about how other experiences. Are there any questions that we should? I'm thinking of myself, my fellow pastors who might be white or Christ followers, definitely. Questions that we should be asking, so that we might better help, better engage. Sometimes we're just not asking the right questions. Sometimes we think we know the answer, and so we don't ask the right questions. So, is there any general type, and I know it's a hard question, probably, maybe not, but to help those conversations that I know we need to listen predominantly, and I think that's a big fix for us, to listen and not try to jump in and tell everybody we know the answer. But so questions, what are good questions?
Yes. And let me preface it by saying, my answer by saying, don't presume that you know the answer.
Good.
When I started the church, I knew that there were certain things that I would have to do as a pastor of a predominantly Black church in the inner city of Los Angeles, helping people to find Christ and then transform their lives, now telling them that a lifestyle that they may have been living that wasn't one that was admirable, now we need to change that lifestyle to one that is more admirable and productive. And I knew that that meant that they would have to end up working on a job. And I knew unless they worked at BET or something like that, which is Black Entertainment Television or something like that, or Ebony Magazine or Jet Magazine or the Sentinel newspaper, if they weren't working at one of the predominantly Black organizations, they were going to work where the majority of the people were non-Black. And I knew that that wasn't a part of the interaction socially, and that their perception and life experience had been one thing, and now they were going to, as a believer, have to live a whole different way and engage. So part of what I would do was intentionally interact with white churches, because that's the predominant racial group in America, white churches, so that these Black members could now interact now rather than when they get on their first job, or rather when they go to a college and have never interacted with white people before. And so I remember that I asked the pastor, I'd love to have us come up and just let our group folks interact with each other. And he asked me the question, why would you? Why would you want to do that? And I had to explain to him exactly why. That one will benefit your folks too, because I'm certain in the area where you're at, well, I knew where, well, I'm just not going to say where, I know that you're not interacting with other minorities at all. And but it's going to build these people up to where they have the social skills that now when they go get a job, they can work on that job right beside white people, and it won't be foreign to them because now they understand some, a little bit, but at least better than none. Same thing with our students who would be leaving, going to colleges and universities and getting into a social environment there that they were just foreign to their world. And that's why we had so many that would rush back to the cities and fail because they weren't prepared. So I would say that, you know, don't ask, I'm gonna use this phrase, don't ask the dumb question. But I would then say the question that should be asked is, how can I or we, the group or the church, assist you to change your community? Ask the person themselves, what can I do to help you make the change that is necessary in your community, that this racism can start to deteriorate, that equality and injustices, equality can rise and injustices can minimize. Secondly, I would say, you know, where or how, I would tell the person themselves is, where or how can I learn more about the reality of the Black experience and Black life? I had a pastor just call me the other day, one of our friends, and he asked me, he said, Jamal, he said, help me. I want to, will you recommend some readings for me so that I can understand the Black and white experience in America? And I asked him later, I sent him a text and asked him, because I didn't want to send recommendations that he may have already read. And so I said, one, do you want an academic book or a non-academic book? Do you want a theological book or so forth? And I said, give me a list of the Black authors that you have already read. And he wrote back and said, I have to apologize, my friend. I've never read a Black author. So that's a question that has to be asked. Where or how can I learn more about the reality of Black life experience? Because you can't help it. You can't bring a change if you don't know about it. And then fourthly, I would say, are you or we, I'm speaking again in that person's position, are we willing to invest the resources to bring about change? That would be the question that you would want to ask somebody like myself or one of the other Black pastors, or Derek Rosenaire, the professor out at Vanguard or something. It's like, you know, I'm willing, but help us to understand how would we do it? How could we invest in what kind of technology to help you to enable people to make these changes? And what could we do financially to assist you so that you can make, do you need us to build a community development center? Do you need technology engaged into a transformation center? Do you need to build a theological center? Do you need to build a religious development center? What do you need? And we're willing to make the investment, whether it's in people, finances, or technology, to make this become a reality, because we know if we can do these things, we lift people up and then we bring people together.
Great. That's great, Jamal. That's wonderful. Now, you mentioned about investing in that. If others who see this podcast and want to try to invest, or how to do that, to help raise things up, would you want me, obviously I'd send those to you, but would you want, is there a place or your church or whatever that you would want, those type of requests to go to?
Yeah, you have the information.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
All right,
yeah.
Good. So yeah, if anybody that's uses this podcast and wants to get involved that way, I will get them to you.
Thank you.
Good thing. So I appreciate that. And this has been great. We've had a long relationship, and any way I could help, I'm here. And any way I could better myself, that's why I'm here today talking with you. And I hope also this will help. This podcast I'll share with our region, and hopefully it'll help others who are wanting to in that. But again, we're not probably asking the right questions.
Mm-hmm.
And so that. Any last comments you have, Jamal, for me, for us?
No, I just thank you that you have the desire to want to have this conversation, and to want to follow up the conversation with some with dialogue, to see how can we put action steps in place to really bring about change. Because when you asked about my reaction to the incident, and then I watched how things were going on, and my thoughts were, we've been here before, and really no action was taken other than surface action. And so I see the surface action taken again. Few politicians making statements, a few political decisions being made, but no substantive or substantial engagement to actually put real action steps that change the relationships and change the lives of those who have been disenfranchised. And I'd like to also say thank you to you, and thank you to Connect Church. And I know this is going to be broader than Connect Church, because you're a much wider experienced man, and you have people that watch you all over the world. But I do want to say a hearty thank you to you and to Connect Church in Ventura for your faithful support and friendship over the years.
Oh, you're so welcome. You're a good friend, and anything we can do, if we are able to, we will do it. And we'll have more conversations, because again, want to be part of a solution and part of a change. I mean, where everybody's talking about change, well, we could talk about it, but like you said, you see, as you saw that, you go, like, here we go again. There's just all this, but no real change is taking place. It does feel, again, to me, it does feel that this one's time's a little different. There seems to be more engagement. There seems to be more of wanting and trying to get change. I don't know how long that energy will last, but hopefully it does make more and long-lasting change than just a bunch of noise. But it does seem, and I think with the response of the millennials, there is some good hope, because they seem to be more engaged than generations prior. They seem to at least acknowledge the problem and see that it needs to be done. So I'm praying. I'm praying and hoping and believing that we'll see real change this time. It's going to be a long time for full change to take place, but at least if we get on that journey and stay on it.
Yes.
And I hope for that. So I want to thank you and so much for this time. And we will talk some more. And I know I'll be seeing you in another Zoom meeting Monday. So
Yes.
we'll talk then. But thank you so much. I
Thank you.
appreciate it. And just blessings to you. And I want to thank you so much, Jamal. Thank you.
Thank you, Pastor. Appreciate it.